After a news anchor got a racist phone call, she turned it into a movement, highlighting hate against Asian Americans.
It became a sense of celebration for people, like they just flipped the hashtag and became this beautiful moment.
And in news that should surprise no one, a new poll shows Portland voters are not exactly happy with the city council or with the direction their city is headed, for that matter.
Voters are really in a sour mood in Portland and the region.
Also, Oregon's legislative session starts in Salem tomorrow. It only lasts about a month, and lawmakers have hundreds of bills they're trying to squeeze in.
It has elements of a real fight.
Here's the story.
Len Bergstein got that email during our interview, and I said, Len, you're so popular. And, he was bashful about it, but I think he is really popular. Welcome to The Story, everybody. Happy Monday. Thank you for joining us. This is the show, if you're not familiar, where we do want to hear from you. So contact info is always at the bottom of the screen. You can email thestory@kgw.com or use that hashtag, TheStoryKGW. We think you're going to have a lot to say about the stories that we have tonight. So with that, let's get started. If you spend any time on social media, you might already be familiar with tonight's big story. Over the last month, the hashtag #VeryAsian has blown up. A news anchor who actually used to work here in the Pacific Northwest started that hashtag, and that hashtag started a movement. The source of it all was a racist voicemail. Here's Christine Pitmanwani.
You post things thinking it's just going to reach your circle of friends.
This is Michelle Lee. She's a television news anchor in St. Louis, Missouri, and recently anchored in Seattle. And as many of us do, she was just living her life.
I'm like going to work, I'm taking care of my kid.
But that was before a 20-second long New Year's Day story that would change her life.
We were just doing a little bitty story about what Americans eat for New Year's Day. And it was like, greens for wealth, cornbread for coins, pork for prosperity. And I just added the line,
I ate dumpling soup. That's what a lot of Korean people do.
That was it, the moment that set everything in motion.
A woman called to complain that she was offended because if white anchors talked about what white people ate, they would be fired, and that I was being very Asian and I needed to keep my Korean to myself. So that message was really shocking to me.
That shock quickly turned into a heavy feeling.
It just started feeling like, like when am I going to not have to deal with racism? And will my son be raised in a racist environment? I just started feeling like very, very sad about the whole thing.
She posted the voicemail on social media. Lee never imagined what would happen next.
But then the next morning, it just started, like my phone just started, and celebrities started tweeting it, politicians.
Now people all over are using it and calling #VeryAsian a movement and a source of pride.
So it became a sense of celebration for people, like they just flipped the hashtag and became this beautiful, beautiful moment.
And it's not just the Asian American Pacific Islander community.
There were people who, in solidarity, posted, like my favorite hashtags were very Jewish and openly Black.
Lee and a friend at another station started a pop-up online. People ordered hats and shirts. The money went to the Asian American Journalists Association.
And what this has done for me in the last 30 days is allowed me to actually dream not only bigger for myself, but also I think for my family, for my son, and for my community.
Then Lee got a call to go on the Ellen DeGeneres show.
She gave me $15,000. I could have taken it as income because it was only addressed to me. I could have donated the money, or I could have used it as seed money to do something great.
She and her family decided on that last option. Lee is starting the #VeryAsian Foundation.
So our goal is to raise money for other organizations already doing great work to amplify diverse Asian American voices. This is really about all of us coming together and recognizing that we have our own special stories and we should embrace and celebrate them.
Okay, Christine Pitmanwani joining us now. And Christine, You and I talked about this earlier. We've been talking about this for a while, frankly, and we're all here at KGW so proud of Michelle. We're so proud to call her a colleague, and it just seems like she is getting a ton of much deserved support.
Maggie, yeah, it's pretty amazing. She has overwhelmingly received so much positive support and feedback, but of course there are people out there who disagree with her. In fact, in my conversation with her today, she played me a voicemail from a Portland woman who said some pretty racist stuff, but of course that's the reality out there. But she's hoping that the hashtag Very Asian and everything that has come about from it will empower people, will offer a sense of pride and of course support.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully after this airs, she gets a ton of support from the Portland area, because we know that that voicemail doesn't represent people in Portland. You know, speaking of support, and again, we've been talking about this, but like as a white woman myself, and for those of us who are not people of color, how should we support this movement, especially given that the hashtag is Very Asian, and like there are shirts and memorabilia that say Very Asian on them?
No, yeah, that's a really good question. And a lot of people have asked the same thing. And Lee tells me that some Asian Americans would prefer that only Asian Americans would use the hashtag Very Asian. But Lee herself feels a bit differently because she was adopted. Her parents are white. Her husband is white. Her son is of mixed race. So her view is that if there's the right intention behind it, then it's fine. But of course, if a person out there is not comfortable using the hashtag Very Asian, wearing the shirts, hats, that kind of thing, there are so many ways to support the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Lee says just start thinking about ways to change your community, to make change. Of course, you could research good organizations that are making a difference, and support that way.
All right, all good ideas. Well, we again applaud and thank Michelle and Christine. Thank you so much for facilitating the conversation and bringing this story to Portland, because it's incredibly important. We appreciate it. All right, switching gears, this might be a bit of a self-serving message, but nonetheless, here we go. Political nerds, start your engines. Again, super self-serving, because tomorrow kicks off Oregon's 2022 legislative session in Salem. Now, we should note, this is a short session. It lasts about a month, as opposed to regular sessions, which usually last several months. But hoo boy, do lawmakers know how to overbook their calendars. These are the, wait for it, 260 measures filed by members of the Oregon House and Senate. Among some key ones, building more affordable housing, police reform, like in one case, one bill would require an officer during a traffic stop tell the driver they can refuse a search of their car. Some lawmakers are pushing for more protections amid the climate crisis by helping more people install air conditioning in their homes. There's also one proposal to pay frontline workers deemed high risk by OSHA up to $1,000 for the hazards they endured working during the pandemic. Now, keep in mind, every session, a ton of bills get proposed, and most of them, frankly, die on the spot. Only a handful ever even make it out of committee and then to a vote. So that in mind, with all of these bills, I asked our political analyst Len Bergstein which ones stand out to him, and he highlighted one in particular. That's it right there. It's House Bill 4002. It basically bans unpaid overtime for agricultural workers, phasing in hourly limits over the next 5 years so that by 2027, if those workers put in more than 40 hours per week, they get time and a half for their OT. The bill would also create an income or corporate tax credit for the employer tied to those extra wages. And Len told me he thinks this could be, his words, the most controversial bill of the entire session.
Why did you say that?
Well, I think, Maggie, that it has the potential of being so controversial because it identifies a real problem, a real and pervasive problem. We have 87,000, I think, folks that are involved in hand harvest, delivering food from the fields to markets. And so it's a very big group of Oregonians that are affected. And if they work in certain agricultural field work, they don't get paid for overtime. They wind up having very long hours and not getting paid in the same way someone else would get paid for overtime. So along comes the answer that says, we've got to solve this problem. We need to come up with some sort of answer. And on the other side of it are all the agricultural interests in the state that say, wait a minute, you're going to burden an already overburdened sector of our economy that we depend on, and you're going to bankrupt some farmers. You just can't do this without having serious consequences. So for quite a while, legislators and these interest groups have been watching what's been going on in some states around us and have tried to come up with perhaps a compromise that would say, let's phase this in over a couple of years, 3 years, 5 years. It has elements of an answer in it, but it has elements of a real fight. And because it's kind of this core question of what's fair and how do we remedy this problem without bankrupting, some sector of the economy.
Our thanks to Len. Again, he's a popular guy. We should know we are just diving into coverage of this session, which again starts tomorrow. We're just starting coverage of this or frankly any other bill. So we'll have much more throughout the session on air and at kgw.com. But in the meantime, we want to give a shout out to those already trying to kind of let some steam out of the Salem tea kettle by sort of poking fun at how stressful these short sessions can be for lawmakers and for their staff. Case in point, this cooking tutorial, cooking is kind of in air quotes, by State Representative Dacia Graber. It was posted on Twitter today.
Welcome to Chef Graber's How to Cook a Bill for the short session. For the long session, we prefer to slow cook our bills at a steady temperature. For the short session, however, we'll be using a pressure cooker.
We loved that. So Graber, a Democrat out of Tigard, goes on to dump in like random ingredients, and she's like, this one's ideas, and then here's some negotiation. She puts in a healthy dose of debate and a dash of compromise. Then the secret ingredient, pressure.
Time's up. Let's see. What do we have here? Oh my gosh. Well, would you look at this? It's a perfectly baked bill. Good luck to everyone working so hard to make short session a success. See you in Salem.
Okay, so obviously we are getting into the political season, which means lots of polling. And a new poll out shows the public in the greater Portland area is frankly fed up with crime and with homelessness, and they're also not impressed with our city leaders. Pat Doris is here now to talk about this. So Pat, let's start with public safety.
You bet. Well, the poll surveyed 500 voters in the greater Portland area. They not only are frustrated with crime, they want more money spent to solve the problems involving public safety. They want police to be required to wear body cameras. They want new officers hired. They also want new prosecutors to hold the criminals accountable. And they want more money for community groups that try to stop the crime before it happens. They also want more money for police in general. And by the way, they are not impressed with Portland city leadership. 81% said the city council is somewhat or very ineffective. Maggie?
Yeah, that is a big number, obviously. So suffice it to say the voters are not in a great mood. That is probably not great then for like the current commissioners who are up, some of them, for re-election right now.
Yeah, it's pretty rough timing. The pollsters asked about the two who are up for election in the city of Portland. Not pretty. For Joanne Hardesty, 18% said they would vote for her again. But look at this. 54% said they would vote for someone else. That's a bad sign. 28% said they're not sure. Dan Ryan is also up for re-election. 10% said they'd vote for him again. 34% said they'd vote for someone else. Again, that's bad. 56% are not sure. Both commissioners now have multiple challengers. Wouldn't surprise me if this poll brings out more for that. Maggie?
Yeah, definitely. All right, Pat Doris, thank you.
You bet.
Instead of defunding the police, the only congressional Republican in the Portland metro area wants to refund them, specifically small police departments.
There are a lot of small forces across the nation that just don't have the resources to bring them, up to a 21st century level.
And we're just days away from another pandemic Olympics. But it's even more complicated this time around with diplomatic boycotts from a number of countries.
If you live by your own charter, yes, you definitely should not be giving the Olympics to a country that abuses human rights in the way that's happening in China as we speak.
When the story continues.
Welcome back. Keep sending those questions and comments to the story at kgw.com or use that hashtag, the story KGW, on Twitter. I'm sure you all remember all the calls to defund the police during the George Floyd protests in 2020 in particular. And the city of Portland responded, you probably also remember, pretty much immediately, cutting $15 million from the police bureau. Since then, things have kind of changed. The city council has pumped more money into the police bureau to respond to the rise in gun violence and fund things like body cameras, which they say are coming. Well, now Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler is pushing a bill to fund smaller police departments locally and nationwide. Here's Christelle Kumwe.
The Kelso Police Department in the small rural community in Southwest Washington has struggled to fill positions. They currently have 28 sworn positions, but only 23 spots filled.
Like most of the state, we're trying to recruit and fill vacancies that have been kind of an epidemic for us in the last 18 months.
Chief Dar Kirk says they've been trying to catch up for the last 3 years, but retirements, resignations, and candidates not making it through training has kept them below budgeted staffing levels.
Any incentive that we can help keep those officers even longer would be helpful for our staffing. And then recruiting new officers for our agency, any incentives would be extremely helpful.
That's one of the goals of the Invest to Protect Act, a legislation introduced by Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler.
There are a lot of small forces across the nation that just don't have the resources to bring them, up to a 21st century level, whether it's technology and data or training or recruitment and retention. And this money is going to help them get there.
The funding would amount to $200 million over 4 years. The Congresswoman says it will help shore up mental health resources, training, recruitment and retention, and investments in body-worn cameras.
Law enforcement is on board when it comes to meaningful reform, and we think body cameras are going to help with that.
The Kelso Police Department just approved a camera program. Chief Kirk says that comes at a steep cost for a department their size.
It's not only going to improve transparency with the public, but it's also going to reassure law enforcement that they have some assurances that what happens on calls gets out to the public so that it's accurate and not speculative. So we're hopeful that this legislation passes.
Christelle Kumwe, KGW News.
So the Winter Olympics start this week. So starting Thursday, we will actually be on a little bit of a hiatus here on this show, but we're not there yet. Tonight, we do want to take some time and talk about the Olympics and not the events themselves. We actually have sports anchors who are much better at that. Tonight, we're going to talk about China, the host of the Games and a country with a long list of human rights violations. A lot of people have been speaking out against this year's Olympics. Human Rights Watch says the Olympics are beginning amid atrocity crimes, their words, including abuse against ethnic groups, journalists, activists, lawyers, and medical workers. President Biden announced that he wouldn't attend the Olympics in Beijing as part of a diplomatic boycott, and leaders of several other countries have now joined in. Our own Laurel Porter actually looked into this weekend on Straight Talk. She interviewed Jules Boykoff. He's right there. He's a political science professor at Pacific University. He's written 4 books about the Olympic Games. And this time around, he says the pandemic is going to make the human rights situation even more complicated.
China has put forth what they call a zero COVID policy that, it must be said, is much more strict than what we saw in Tokyo, including daily testing, including staying entirely inside of the Beijing bubble. And, it's been highly effective. Just for comparison's sake, there have been 6,000 coronavirus deaths in China since coronavirus started. I mean, we had almost 4,000 coronavirus deaths in the United States on Wednesday of this week. So it is working. Some people think it's draconian. And one thing that the people in China are saying is that we need this because our vaccines don't necessarily protect against Omicron. So they have this closed-loop system, but this isn't enough for human rights advocates who have noted that, in a way, coronavirus has become sort of a convenient alibi for China to ratchet up social control in ways that look responsible epidemiologically, but that have the side effect of muzzling dissent even further. So in short, COVID could be a pretext of sorts for suppressing critical journalism out of these Beijing Games and also political dissent from athletes and others.
To that point, athletes are being advised not to speak up about abuses or hold protests at the games, to wait until they're out of China. And journalists and athletes are bringing burner phones and laptops because of cybersecurity and surveillance risks in China. You can watch Laurel's full conversation with Jules Boykoff right now on our KGW YouTube page. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We want to take a few minutes on this Monday to highlight basically another show here on KGW that we're super proud of. It's called Expressions in Black, and it's courtesy of Heart and Hustle Productions. It's a series of documentary shorts that air every Monday night, at 7 here on KGW. Each short tells the story of one Black Oregonian, in their words, thriving and sharing their Black excellence. And we want to give you a preview now of tonight's episode. It focuses on Ian Williams, the founder of Dead Stock Coffee.
I've always been a person who understands that my life is a little bit different than everybody else's. Y'all ready to come in? Let's do it. I started the coffee shop because I wanted to be able to do whatever it is I wanted to do. Come over here, pick up some merch, get the Instagram popping. I was like, what makes money every single day? Coffee. So I opened up Dead Stock. Dirty chocolate almond milk. There you go. I didn't know anything about coffee, but I understood that I wanted to be good at it. Mochas are kind of what we do. That's what we're really known for. I had to understand the industry of coffee first in order to be able to influence it, change it, or be successful in it. And that was the best way that I knew I would be able to be in control of my own future. I'm Ian Williams, and this is Expressions in Black.
And now I want a coffee at 6:30 in the evening. Again, that was a preview of tonight's episode. It looks fantastic. It airs every Monday at 7 p.m. right here on KGW. Again, it's called Expressions in Black. All right, keep sending in your questions and your comments to the story at kgw.com. We're going to finish the show next. Welcome back, guys. Normally, we keep Portland pretty weird around here, but tonight we're keeping Milwaukee, Oregon weird. The suburb is already planning for next year's New Year's Eve, when they want to drop a giant Bing cherry instead of a ball. The Oregonian Samantha Swindler tweeted a thread about this last week. She wrote, "For years, I have dreamed of having a New Year's Eve ball drop event in Milwaukee where the Bing cherry was first cultivated. I had no idea until I read this tweet. I've pursued this based almost solely on the fact that Bing in the new year is an awesome pun." We agree. Now, Milwaukee Arts Committee is working on this project. The city supports the concept and put out a request for quotes for the construction of a 3D lighted cherry. Any and all cherry concepts welcome. Samantha, thank you so much for these tweets. It can be wood, metal, plastic, carved from foam blocks. We have budgeted up to $5,000. So if you are an artist with apparently a very specific cherry taste who wants to help the city Bing in the new year, which we are now using, with a giant Bing cherry, check in with the Milwaukee Arts Committee. They are taking proposals through February 18th, and we cannot wait to see what comes from that idea. That's fantastic. Pick up your phone, follow us on Twitter at @TheStoryKGW, or email thestory@kgw.com. That does it for this show. The news at 6:30 with Laurel Porter starts now.
This is KGW News at 6:30.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Flags in Vancouver are at half-staff tonight to honor a Vancouver Police Department officer who was mistakenly shot.